So, and I would say let's get started. I think what's really important is what we also highlight is beyond the Bible workbook and beyond budgeting. There's also the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable Conference in spring in Switzerland coming. We'll also later on have a raffle and have one lucky winner getting a ticket for free. So please stay tuned till the end of the webcast, and then we will announce the lucky winners of both the ticket and the book packages. On the questions I had when we planned this webcast and Beyond Budgeting, the key questions when I also talked to colleagues and peers is, do we abolish the budget, basically? It's beyond budgeting. What else is there? Bjarte, that's going to be interesting. And beyond Svenska Handelsbanken, are there any other companies actually pursuing this? Obviously, we have close to 100 people today here in that webcast. Apparently, it rings a bell, but is anyone else doing it? And Marie-Luise, if I want to get started on that journey, does it take 20 years or things that I could do if I want to start that journey? That's at least 3 questions I found to be interesting. And I would say, Bjarte, over to you. And please shed some light on Beyond Budgeting, what's going on here.
Thank you, Philip, and hello to everybody. The author Douglas Adams once wrote that I might not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I ended up where I needed to be. And those words resonate with me because that's basically the story of my life, because it was in no way given that I should be here with you today and talk about Beyond Budgeting, because my career started in a very different place. I graduated from business studies many years ago and joined a company that used to be called Statoil, now Equinor, the energy company, one of Scandinavia's largest companies. And my first management job was actually head of the corporate budget department. So I think I know what I'm what I'm talking about. I've been working with Beyond Budgeting now for almost 30 years. I actually started out before there was anything called Beyond Budgeting. And I have discussed this with a lot of people all over the world, executives, finance people, managers, others. And when I talk about Beyond Budgeting, there's one word that keeps coming up over and over again, and that word is control. And the context is, of course, the fear of losing control, which I can understand. But I often ask these people, please help me understand, what do you mean with control? And since you are so afraid of losing it. And the interesting thing is that after people have set cost control, many actually go quiet. They struggle with defining what they are so afraid of losing. So I checked up with Oxford Dictionary. How would they define control? And they define it as the power to influence or direct people's behavior or the course of events. And what does this mean in organizational terms, in business terms? Well, it basically means 2 things: controlling people and controlling the future. And behind these 2 lies the 2 main assumptions behind traditional management. Number 1, you can't trust people. Number 2, the future is predictable and plannable. This is not true, and this is what we are challenging in Beyond Budgeting, because these are more illusions of control. Of course, you can manage people, but if people are managed in stupid ways, they hopefully find a way around in order to get their job done. And when it comes to the future, the only thing we know is that we don't know. So this is what Beyond Budgeting is challenging, and this is what has kind of inspired Beyond Budgeting, finding alternative ways of leading and managing in companies. And that is why Beyond Budgeting is not just about changing processes, because we talk about people here, trusting people. So we're also talking about leadership in Beyond Budgeting. And we talk about important things like purpose, values, autonomy, transparency, and so on. But we are not alone as a community talking about those things. Many others do. If you look at lean, agile, they all do. But very often, other communities have not reflected, and other models have not reflected that much on what kind of management processes are needed to activate good intentions on leadership related to, for instance, purpose, values, autonomy, transparency. And that is why we are addressing both dimensions in Beyond Budgeting and in the 12 Beyond Budgeting principles that look like this. I will not go through anything of this in detail, but just a few quick reflections on these principles before we move on. The headline is important here. It is about performance the right way. Beyond Budgeting changes how we define performance, how we deliver performance, how we evaluate performance, and how we reward performance the right way. And again, you can see we are addressing both dimensions. And what is key here is to create the coherence between what we preach on the left-hand side here on leadership and what we practice in our management processes on the right-hand side. And one classical example of the opposite that we find in so many organizations. It doesn't help that we on the left-hand side talk loud and warm related to principle 4 autonomy, about how fantastic people and employees we have on board, and we would be nothing without you, and we trust you so much. But not that much. Of course, we need detailed travel budgets. This is hypocrisy. People notice, and the words on the left-hand side become hollow because the management processes have a different message. And what we do almost always speaks 10 times louder than what we say. There has to be coherence, consistency, so important. These principles are principles. This is not any kind of recipe. So what this should mean in your organization, well, that depends. It depends on your case for change, the kind of problems you have. It depends on your business, your culture, your history. And that's the way it should be. I don't like management recipes, because in a management recipe, somebody has done all the thinking for you. So the only thing you have to do is kind of buy the books and hire the consultants and tick the boxes. Well, here you have to think for yourself, what should this mean in our organization? This doesn't mean that we don't have loads of practical recommendations on what this could mean, but be careful with blindly copying from others. You have to look at your own case for change. Two classical misunderstandings around Beyond Budgeting. They are both linked to Principle 9, resource allocation, cost management. Some people think this is just another way of managing cost. Well, it is, but it is about so much more, as you can see here. This is a quite complete, comprehensive leadership and management model. Second misunderstanding, Beyond Budgeting, no traditional budget. That must mean that cost is not important. I can spend whatever I want. Sorry, that's not what we are saying. Cost is still important in order to create value. Because cost is important, we need more intelligent, effective ways of managing cost than what a certain Mr. James O. McKinsey proposed 100 years ago when he invented budgets. And we are providing that more intelligent ways of managing cost. I will give you a few examples in a minute. One question from Philip was, who else are doing this? Well, that is a pretty long list, and I could have talked for hours and hours about amazing management innovation taking place in these companies. We don't have the time. So just a few quick examples. Let's start a bit small. In Norway, in the upper left-hand corner, you see a company called Miles. Miles is an IT company. It has no budgets, no targets actually, but a lot of great performance. If you work for Miles, you can buy whatever PC you want, as expensive as you want, replace it as often as you want. No PC budgets. You can attend whatever conference, course you want, as often as you want, wherever in the world. no travel budgets, no training budgets. But it's not an anarchy. When you have bought that PC, when you have returned from that training, you have to post on the intranet what you did and the cost of it. So transparency is their main control mechanism, and it works wonderfully. But many would say that the pioneer in beyond budgeting is the bank that Philip mentioned, the Swedish Handelsbanken that you see in the middle at the top here, with around 700 branches in Northern Europe, quite big in UK, by the way. And this is an amazing bank, and this is the guy that got it all started. And it's an amazing story for many reasons. First of all, because they have, again, no budgets, no targets, no individual bonus. But it doesn't stop here. They have been doing this since 1970. But it doesn't stop here either, because this bank has been performing better than the average of its competitors every single year since 1972. And how have they achieved this? Well, by applying the beyond budgeting principles before there was anything called beyond budgeting. They actually were one of the companies that inspired beyond budgeting. A lot of autonomy, a lot of transparency, a lot of benchmarking internally between branches. And nobody likes to be laggards. So this really drives performance, but not just that, it also drives learning, right? Because again, they have no individual bonuses, they have a common bonus scheme driven by how is the bank performing versus other banks, which actually gives everybody a reason to help other struggling branches. Again, an amazing company, an amazing case. Now you might say that, well, we are not a bank, we are different. But the problems that the companies face in this area are so common, even if you are in, well, public sector, private sector, manufacturing, services, whatever. The problems are very uniform, so it doesn't really matter that much what kind of business you are in. Some people tell us that, well, this is good stuff, but this is, looking at the principles, this is so big, it's almost scary. And I can understand that. And if you are in that place right now, I've got some good news for you, because we have a recommendation on a very simple, practical, tested way of getting started that later can take you into bigger beyond budgeting discussions. And it goes back to asking a very simple question, namely, why do we budget? What's the purpose of a budget? And I've asked that question to so many people all over the world during these years, and most people come up with 3 different reasons. Budgets are used to set targets, financial targets, sales targets, production targets. At the same time, these budgets shall be a kind of forecast of what next year could look like in terms of profits, hopefully, cash flow. So it is a kind of forecast. So then we've got 2 purposes, targets and forecasts. And the last purpose is resource allocation, handing out bags of money to the organization on operational costs and investments, OPEX and CAPEX. And it might seem very efficient to solve all 3 in one process and one set of numbers once a year. But that is also the problem, because what happens when we move into a budget process? And let's assume that upstairs, finance, they are very keen to understand what next year's profit could look like for next year. So let's start out by asking people from a kind of almost a forecasting perspective, what are your best, those responsible for revenues, what are your best numbers for next year? But everybody knows that what I'm sending upstairs will most likely come back to me as a target for next year, and often with a bonus attached. And we all know that that insight might do something to the level of numbers submitted, and you all know which way those numbers would move. Moving to the cost side, OPEX, CAPEX, the same people, other people, they are asked, what are your best numbers for next year? But everybody knows that this is my only shot at getting access to resources for next year. And some might also remember that 20% cut from last year. And that insight and that memory might also do something to the level of numbers submitted. And I think you know what I'm talking about. And this is a problem because this process stimulates behaviors that is at least borderline unethical. The lowballing, the gaming, the sandbagging, the resource hoarding, those are not the kind of behaviors we would like to see between colleagues, right? At the same time, I'm not blaming anyone for behaving like this, because here people are just responding to the system we have designed for them to operate within. So if we want to change behaviors, it's not about fixing people. It's about fixing systems, which again changes behavior. And the fix that we recommend here is to separate these three things into three different processes, because these are different things. A target is an aspiration, is what we want to happen. And a forecast is an expectation. It's what we think will happen. What do we like what we see or not? And how can we force that into one and the same number? And last but not least, resource allocation is about the optimization of scarce resources. And once we have separated here, we can start to improve each one in ways impossible when it was all bundled in one process and one set of numbers. Now we can start to have great discussions about how can we set and design targets that really stretch people without feeling stretched. And one recommendation here we have is to think in relative terms, meaning think in football terms. I have yet to meet the football team saying that the ambition for next season is to score 39 goals and get 42 points. They don't think like that. Those are budget goals. They think in terms of league tables. It's all about doing well against peers and hopefully better than everybody else. And again, that thinking can in some cases also be applied within organizations, as we just learned from Handelsbanken, where they compare both internally and externally. And those targets should be the basis for the performance evaluation. Then we can move to the forecasting process and work on getting out the bias of forecasting, addressing the behaviors that create bias. And that is by developing forecasting into a process which is just about forecasts. In this model, a forecast is not a bid into a target negotiation. It's not an application for resources. It's just a forecast. And a forecast here is not a promise, something you shall deliver on. It's targets we shall deliver on. And we use forecasts to help us move towards those targets and hopefully deliver on them. We don't need a million details here. This is forecasting. We are looking at the future. The future carries uncertainty. The past doesn't. The past we describe through accounting, and then the decimals and the details not just make sense, they are often required. But when we turn around and look at the future, we need to leave behind the accounting mindset and accept and embrace and take advantage of ambiguity and uncertainty instead of fearing it. And as I later will come back to, we can also do something with the rhythm here, making it, for instance, rolling forecast or dynamic forecasting. And last but not least, how can we find alternative ways of managing cost? And this is the area where people have the most questions. I don't have time to go in detail, but just a very quick examples before I'm going to finish here. One recommendation we have on investments, CAPEX, is not to operate with a traditional investment budget, where you sit in the autumn and decide everything for next year, exactly how much to invest, exactly split on each project, and then you hand out these bags of money to each project. We recommend something different, based on a principle we call the bank should always be open, which simply means that the line should be able at any time to apply for funds for a project. Whether they get a yes or no depends on two things. How good is your project against the criteria we have? Financial, non-financial, strategic, sustainable, and so on. And second question, can we afford it as things looks today? And where is that information coming out? From unbiased, rolling or dynamic forecasting. So it's not that difficult on investments. It's a bit more challenging when we move to operating cost, but very quickly, a few quick recommendations. You can, instead of the traditional annual detailed cost budget, you can operate with what we call a kind of overall burn rate guiding. Yes, there is an overall number of X million. Within that, full freedom to optimize and spend in the best possible way. Big difference between that and a traditional budget. But we can move further from thinking in absolute terms to relative terms. We can operate with constraints linked to unit cost, right? So you can spend more if you produce more, if you sell more, and vice versa. We can make this even more self-regulating, that you have benchmark unit cost constraints. If you have then, as an other alternative, if you have internal profit centers with a tough bottom line target, that's also a way to manage cost. Those units cannot run away and spend money like crazy, but it might be okay to spend more if what that spend is about is what we call good cost. Good cost is not a problem as long as we have the funding, because that creates value. It's the bad cost we want to get rid of. The last alternative here is the most radical. Nothing at all. The only numbers we have in this alternative is actual cost coming from the accounts. And here we monitor cost, and if it looks okay, we do nothing. If we need to do something, or if it looks strange, we investigate. And there might be very good reasons for this happening, but we might also come across teams managers who consciously and unconsciously abuse the trust in this model. If that happens, we should not respond like so many do, CEOs, CFOs, and then kind of punish everybody because somebody abused the trust. The right response is to deal firmly with those who abuse that trust without putting everybody in jail. And last but not least, when we have separated here, we can also organize each of these processes on a rhythm that better fits not just the kind of business we're in, but also the different purposes here, meaning that you would change targets more, or not that often, forecasting much more often, and resource allocation taking place all the time. This is an important slide because this is a great way to get started, because when you have started those improvement discussions, then you quickly move into often bigger discussions about what target setting, what really motivates people, trust, do we need detailed travel budgets if we say we trust people, and so on. And also, back to another question that Philip had, do we abolish budgets? Well, yes and no, because here we still do what that budget tried to do for us, but because we've separated, we can do each one in much, much better ways. So with that, I'm going to close, and then I'll leave the raffle here to somebody else. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Bjarte, thank you very much. I think we'll have a Q&A session at the end. There have been some questions already posted in the chat. And yeah, and we also see here some reactions. Thank you very much. And for one lucky participant, he or she might learn a bit more. So let the random number generator decide who's going to be the lucky winner before we move on and get then also to the Q&A later on. So it's Inge Horath. Congratulations. We get in touch with you on the book prize. So thanks for staying with us. Perfect. Yeah, moving on. Key question is, thanks, Bjarte. Now I learned, okay, what's beyond budget? What else is? I learned a lot about rolling forecast. I learned about separating the different purposes and be clear what I want. We learned about the 12 principles, right, on behavior. And the question is really how to get started and how to look at it. And here I'm really curious on Marie-Luise. Actually, how should we get started? What are successful ways to actually go beyond that, beyond budgeting or better performance management journey?
Yes, thank you very much. I think I've still got difficulties to switch my video on, so maybe somebody from behind the scenes can help me do that. And yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to combine the experience that has been there for the last 24 years in the community, and also combine this with what we see in the market. And I mean, as Bjarte, said, there's a lot of people being interested in the topic around beyond budgeting, and listening to him. I mean, at least I usually have that feeling, is that this all sounds quite understandable. So it is really kind of like common sense. The question is, why is it not common practice? And this is maybe something that I can tackle a bit, because what we see is that people feel quite overwhelmed from getting started, because they just don't know how to do it, right? And I think Bjarte already mentioned some points. We want to show the patterns behind that, and maybe give you a good idea once you are done with the call today on what kind of starting point, what kind of way would be suitable for you. So we are basically looking at 3 different patterns we have identified. I'm sure there's more, and if you feel you're not represented in what we are saying here, please reach out so that we can kind of like add up on that. So one thing is really to change the behavior. So start with being more flexible towards or reactive towards the environment. This is usually something that happens bottom up, from people that feel a need for change, maybe don't yet have their management support. This is, by the way, the closest we can get also to agile approaches, where the agile community really asks for being customer centric, looking at increasing impact, things like that. You can transfer this to the thought of beyond budgeting or a performance management system that's really adaptive and flexible. And this is not so much done by processes and steering, but much more by changing the behavior. The interesting bit about this changing behavior is that it is a transformation from within, usually with no or very low cost, because we are not changing the whole kind of like department or the way of working. It is really tiny bits that change there, and I'm going to show you in a minute some examples of how to do that. So usually this is quite a good idea for people that want to go beyond budgeting, want to start, and well, either are having no budget available, or well, want to kind of like get started trying, right? The second thing is solving these conflicting purposes of planning, budgeting, and forecasting. And this is something that Bjarte highlighted quite nicely. And I think this is, at the moment, at least one of the most common approaches towards beyond budgeting, because people feel that they have to change the way they plan, budget, and forecast in order to meet the requirements of their environment. And here it really comes with changing the processes first and then changing the behavior. And this is something that we also see around quite often, because it seems to be much easier to, look at processes, align them, and say, okay, we have to do it differently. And then the behavioral change kind of like comes with it, right? And very often this also incorporates a combination of process optimization and digitization, for example, of the forecasting process that's going to be more automated or under the usage of artificial intelligence, for example. And the last approach is a very holistic approach, really aiming at a coherence between the environment, the leadership, and the management principles. I will point that out later as well. But the idea behind this is to solve this say-do gap Bjarte was referring to, where organizations give you freedom in regards of, you know, values and purpose and things like that, but then really on the other hand still have a very rigid approach towards budgeting and forecasting and target setting. And to get this aligned, the third approach really helps to make that visible. But let's dive deeper into each of those three pillars. So changing behavior, you know, is really, as I said, a lot of, you know, are very comparable to agile also. And it's really about changing the role from within and really living the role of, e.g., a business partner. This is what very often happens, and not just given the role description. And here's some thoughts on how you can do this. One aspect would be to maximize the internal customer value and strategy execution. Now, for finance departments, thinking about having an internal customer is usually kind of like a new idea, but thinking about your internal customer, identifying what, you know, the problems arising there, the challenges this customer has, and then discussing with them and not, you know, kind of like guessing what they would need. This would be one of the possibilities to support the customer even better and to serve and create value on that matter. Yeah. The second aspect would be understanding the problem and not providing the solution. What do I mean with that? I think many people that have worked in finance know the case where people come up and say, okay, can you give me this and that report, or can you do this and that extract? And very few try to understand or re-question what the problem, the initial problem was really. And they are just providing the solution. And this is really something where, you know, finance departments can change their behavior towards being more of a business partnering by challenging what they have been asked and trying to understand the problem behind it to offer a maybe even better solution, but also to challenge what they are getting in terms of, does it fit the overall priorities of the company or the priorities that we have set for the current working circle? Is it a reasonable effort? And also quality of solution. I mean, very often we then start to, you know, provide reports or any, you know, insights, and it just takes ages. And, you know, if your customer would have known that it's not that easily done, they would have changed the question or would say, okay, it is not that important. So really understanding the problem and not only jumping for the solution. The third thing is maximize the amount of work not done. That always sounds a bit funny, but it is really about don't execute tasks just because it's always been done. Re-question consequently in terms of value add. So very often, I mean, I've seen this with, you know, reports that have been historically provided, things like that. the best way of getting more effective and efficient is to maximize the amount of work not done and to really, really re-question what you're doing there. Really kind of like adding to stop, starting, start, finishing. I mean, this is kind of like a phenomenon we have everywhere, that people start a lot of things, start a lot of projects. You know, somebody is calling, maybe even the CFO, he wants something new. You stop what you just did and, you know, try to tackle the problem you just got new onto your desk. And I mean, this is really, really unproductive. It really decreases the amount of work that you get done overall, the quality, and usually it is really a reason for people not being that motivated anymore because they have constant, you know, change of focus. So limit your work in progress, finish or kill your task projects before you start new ones. And that's also, I mean, it is common sense, but make it common practice. And the last thing is something for the leaders within this group. This is about being a beekeeper rather than a shepherd. What do I mean with that? You know, as a leader, think about providing optimal conditions for your team so that they can do the work because they are able to do the work, right? And not kind of like push them to go any further. Usually, I mean, if you trust your people, if you have a environment where people strive, you don't need to push them to get things done. So rather look that there's no disruptions, that they have clear priorities, that they have a clear definition of done. And this is quite hard, especially this thing about clear priorities. This usually fosters a whole way of new discussion in the organization because you will learn that, you know, priorities, your priorities might not be the priorities of the neighbor department and things like that. So really thinking about priorities is a very, very valued topic to decrease the effort you're putting into your work. The second thing, changing behavior and processes. This is really tackling the problem of planning, budgeting, and forecasting. And I've brought a visual with me that shows the typical planning, budgeting, forecast process we see in companies. And I have to say, I've seen this myself because I've worked over 12 years in the industry. So what we did was basically planning, budgeting, forecasting all year round, right? So usually after the summer, there's a strategy development phase where the board sits together and discusses, you know, where do they want to go over the next year. And then this is, you know, where the budgeting and planning phase starts, where you create your budget, usually bottom up, because management wants to see what people, you know, what people's targets are, and then they would say, okay, you know, this is not realistic or ambitious enough. You would need to add more. Meanwhile, the actuals are coming in, and you see that, you know, what you have planned has really not that much to do with what you see in the actual numbers. So you keep adjusting until finally at a certain point you say, okay, this budget is handed in. And usually also at a point where everyone in the company knows that the budget is really not serving the course, that, you know, it should be revised. This is where you start forecast one. And the whole subject kind of like starts again. But really quoting Bjarte there, with looking at these conflicting purposes, what you can do is you can create a much leaner process that looks like that, for example, in Beyond Budgeting. You would have a very short strategy development phase, because this is where you talk about relative numbers, about your peers, about your benchmarks. It's finished with a clear target setting, and then you would have a forecast that's rather event-driven than cyclic. So whenever you feel that there's a need to redo the forecast, you would start this. And as it is decoupled from the budget, it is a far leaner process, and usually it's automated. That makes it even leaner. And so you can really kind of like use the time available for either, working more as a business partner. We're saving money after all, right? And this is, what we usually see, 20 to 30% reduction in staff costs through improved efficiency. And this doesn't mean that, you need to reduce staff. It's just the staff that's available for, e.g., doing more value-adding stuff, right? And understanding the environment better, the company better, and being involved in discussions around resource allocation and changing the system there. The third pillar would be the holistic approach, as I state this, the viable map. And I think it's a really, really good way for those people that want, or that feel that, they have a lot of, questions, issues. They want to kind of like get this sorted and prioritized. I think this is a very good way to start here, because what it does is that it puts into relation the leadership principles with the management principles and the environmental context. So this means when you look at your environment as a company, and it is rather VUCA, so rather volatile, uncertain, complex, or ambiguous, this is where you learn that in terms of coherency, a certain management model and leadership principles have to follow. And by kind of like addressing this, for example, via a sticky note, kind of like marking yourself here on the environmental context, you can then go through the viable map by using, each of the principles, and see where your actual status is, for example, and discuss around that for the management, for the leadership principles. And you would maybe find, there's inconsistencies between the environmental context and the way, for example, we do targets and forecasting, or about, how we serve our customer. So the idea behind this is not to be on the right-hand side, that, everything needs to be distributed or relative in a way, but to find a management model that is sufficient for the environment and the environmental complexity you're facing, right? And so with this coherency, you can see this from the line down here, it is really a discussion point, and to start and say, okay, how would I go from there to there, and this is where you can start the discussion and get some initiatives going on, and also prioritize them. So that's kind of like the third point. Summing this up, what have we covered today? And I look at the watch, I think we are good in time, yes. So I think there were some misconceptions. One was to abolish the budget. I think Bjarte said this quite nicely. No, we are not abolishing the budget with Beyond Budgeting, but we are rather shifting to a more flexible and adaptive performance management system. Which companies have implemented Beyond Budgeting? Well, there's a lot, and there's even more on its way. And also, I would like to add, you don't have to do, beyond budgeting as a whole to follow all these principles. It is really even picking elements. This is what we've seen with many companies that just start somewhere, for example, with decoupling these planning, budgeting, and forecasting. And the last thing was, how do we approach beyond budgeting? Well, many roads lead to Rome. I think you found 3 ways of doing it. And maybe to conclude here, the best day to start was yesterday, but the second best day is today. And with that, I'm giving over to Philip again.
Thanks, Marie-Luise. Perfect. Let's talk about your questions. Maybe let's start with the first question of Johannes. On that end, how do you fulfill corporate reporting requirements, for example, earning updates, or for me, quarterly reporting, quarterly financial reporting, and capital market guidance, if you do these kind of ad hoc or event-driven forecasting? Now, how do you integrate this? Maybe this goes both to you, Marie-Luise, or Bjarte. Maybe to Bjarte, what's your experience with this? How do you fulfill these requirements, and maybe maybe you need to have a capital warning if your ad hoc forecasting gives an urgent issue. How do you deal with that, or any experience how other companies have dealt with that?
Well, first of all, I mean, when it comes to statutory reporting, beyond budgeting doesn't change much on portal reporting and so on. But it does change the way we deal with the more forward-looking things. And when it comes to guiding, the point is that by separating, you improve each of the 3 purposes, including forecasting. And you get a much more trustworthy, unbiased internal forecast, which again can be the basis for your external guiding. So this really helps you also on that side. Beyond that, I want to say that, I mean, the fact I'm being a listed company is not a barrier at all for going beyond budgeting. A lot of the companies I was showing on that overview are listed companies. That's not where the challenge lies. The challenge lies internally, and it sits between our ears. This is about changing how we think. That's the challenging part.
Thanks, Bjarte. Maybe the second question by Eike. Eike said, maybe this goes to Marie-Luise. Marie-Luise, he says, hey, in understanding the problem, it's question your internal customers' demand for a solution to provide the most effective one. I think that's a good point. How would you, or would I, as an FP&A, as a controlling department, integrate my customers' view on that journey? Or how much of my internal customers do need to take part of the journey to make this successful?
Well, I think at the beginning, identifying the customer, and this might be a rather kind of like bigger effort to do so, to identify them first, and maybe use personas or something like that to create a good understanding of what your customer actually is. And then I think once you have done that, and you're kind of like working in your daily business, by just kind of like working closely with them together and integrating them, for example, in your meetings and stuff like that, you will get direct feedback. Even more so when people start to not question the overhead costs they get from being your business partner, and being addressed to the P&L. So I think there's several possibilities there.
Thank you. Maybe the third question that I see here by Bogdan, he says, could you define performance management and expand a link between beyond budgeting and performance management? Maybe I take that question myself. In my experience, as we have learned, it's about behavior, processes, and management model. If I think about performance management, it goes from along the performance management cycle, strategic planning, midterm planning, budgeting, forecasting, performance dialogues, reporting, analytics, measure definition, whatever. I think it was pretty clear on the viable map as one framework to see how do I calibrate both the processes, the data granularity, the people involved, and the purpose most importantly, to fit these requirements. So while we have beyond budgeting as a framework, that's at least how I interpret it and how I actually use it. Then going and saying, what are my different performance management events? What are my FP&A services? And how do I calibrate them? For me, that personally works best. And I think, again, the Viable Map is a viable tool to actually do that screening and think where to start first. I think that's important to not say I need, and I think that's what Marie-Luise showed, not to have a totally new steering model in a 2 years project and then 3 years of S4HANA implementation before I actually start something. But I think here's bits and pieces that you could apply right now. And moving on, and I think that has been made clear, I guess, by Marie-Luise, how beyond budgeting and rolling forecasting, and also what Bjarte has said on the link or the replacement of the beyond budgeting, going more to event-driven planning, going more to rolling forecasting, that's really helpful. So maybe to Bjarte, because rolling forecasting or event-based forecasting is also a lot of questions where I get the question, does it work? Does it help? How does it integrate? Maybe Bjarte experiences on your end on rolling forecasting and do's and don'ts.
Well, the big don't is don't start with rolling forecasting alone. I've seen a number of companies doing that, and it's a road to disaster. Because when I hear that, my question then will always be, okay, how will you then solve the two other budget purposes, target setting and resource allocation? And some people say that, well, we will do this through the rolling forecast. Well, if that's the model, the only thing, what you are introducing is rolling budgeting, right? Budget 4 times a year, and a lot of pissed off people will never work. Other people say that we will continue to make budgets for targets and resource allocation. Well, if that's the model, then you have solved very few of the problems with budgeting and traditional management. So our strong advice is, yes, by all means, start with a separation, but you can't do this sequential. You have to do it in parallel. At the same time that you introduce rolling forecasting, you have to explain to the organization, how will we now set targets and how will we now allocate resources?
Thank you. Next question, Johannes Brunner asked, most companies probably link the budget or 3-year strategy plans to staff incentives and bonus model. Oh yeah, that's also one of my favorite questions. How do you maximize your personal share of wallet and versus a realistic positioning and not game the system? And Bjarte, again to you, because I think that's is one, in my experience, one big issue when talking to others, to peers, on how to manage personal incentives, personal, also financial compensations, and at the same time try to have a realistic budget, where it's equally like to maybe underperform than to overperform. I think decoupling might be one solution, but also curious on your experience here, and also Marie-Luise, what are you thinking about this incentives and realistic planning?
The beyond budgeting recommendation is quite clear, principle 11. We recommend where it's possible to have common bonus schemes driven, for instance, by how is the company doing versus competition instead of individual bonus schemes. And one reason for this is all the research out there on motivation. And I can find maybe no other area where there's a bigger gap between what most research is telling us about motivation, where it says that the individual bonus is not a good idea, and what most companies are practicing. At the same time, we know that this is a kind of elephant in the room, so we shouldn't allow it to be a showstopper. If we can't do something with individual bonuses, then at least take a look then at principle 10 about the holistic performance evaluation. So don't let that bonus be driven by a narrow mechanical comparison of two numbers, actual versus budget. There has to be a holistic performance evaluation where you look at all the things that measurement didn't pick up, and changes in assumptions and headwind and tailwind, and in some companies how these targets were achieved related to the values in the company. So have this holistic evaluation on top, and not just comparing numbers. But ideally, think like Handelsbanken, common bonus schemes instead of individual bonus schemes.
Yeah. Yeah, I would totally agree, and maybe add that what we see in the market is that many companies also, add a kind of like team goal for that. So it's not only the relative budget number, but also behavioral aspects that rather go into the direction of the leadership principles.
Perfect. And I think that also ties nicely into the question Andreas asked on how to manage what you can't measure. Again, I think, and also I've made positive experiences here in implementing relative targets. So I think the metaphor Bjarte had with the absolute number or the league table of the sports team is really nice. So the question is not what's your absolute number. The question is rather, are you number one or at the end of the league table, for example, compared to competition? And we've seen also companies using a certain share of the bonus compensation and award them to relative targets. Obviously, there are also plenty of reasons why it's not working, why the competition is not defined exactly, and why there in this year, in this moment, there are 700 reasons why this is not making sense. But I think that's also what Bjarte and Marie-Luise said. The question is really, when we go into performance management theory and incentive theory, the question is really what's working, what's not. I think not what's 100% cost-based. Maybe time for no more time for questions, and happy if you should deep dive, please get in touch with us. I think we will also both provide this webcast later on our website and where also the contact data is. However, we have one last raffle. Thanks for staying with us. Maybe before I close the call, we will both have, and thanks for the positive feedback, another bug book package and our free ticket to the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable conference. So who's going to be the lucky person to win? Let's see. It's Dennis. Congratulations, Dennis, for the book package. And looking to the Performance Management Beyond Budgeting Roundtable ticket. We are happy to have Sebastian here with us in Switzerland later this year. From my end, thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much, Bjarte. Thank you very much, Marie-Luise. I learned a lot of new things, and I now know what comes beyond budgeting. And looking forward to continuing the dialogue. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.